We just stepped on their face with a hobnail boot and broke their nose. We just crushed their face.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Glory UJ podcast, brought to you by the great people at Alumni Hall. I am Tyler, and off the top, guys, before I forget, let's go ahead and take care of some business real quick. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. I think today's episode is another one of those episodes where you're probably going to have some pretty strong thoughts about what I am going to say, one way or the other, whether you agree or disagree. So I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you think in the comments. But today, I've got another one of Georgia's early season point spreads to break down for you guys. And this is a big one, maybe even a controversial one in some regards, as Georgia is going into Tuscaloosa, at least right now here in May, as a early 4.5 point favorite against the Alabama Crimson Tide. And I do think that line might have caught some people off guard. Certainly, Alabama fans probably feel a certain way about that. I mean, I'm pretty sure, I'm not an Alabama fan myself, don't really know a lot of Alabama fans, but I can imagine what Alabama fans, if you're out there, what you're probably thinking right now, or what you thought when you saw that line. You're seeing that line, and you're thinking, man, we own Georgia. How can we possibly be an underdog against that program in our own stadium? I mean, didn't we just beat them in the SEC championship game? And I get it. I do. I get that thought process. I mean, Alabama is undeniably, indeed, the one team that Kirby Smart has really not had a ton of success against. That's true. I can't deny that. No one can deny that. That's reality. That's what the record says. But here's what I would argue about that take, about that mindset. Saying that this Alabama team is going to have the same type of success against Georgia in 2024, the same type of success that previous Alabama teams have had under Nick Saban against Kirby Smart, that is a false equivalence, guys, because this is not the same program. It's Alabama, yes, ostensibly it's the same program, but it's not Nick Saban's Alabama. Nick Saban's out the door, guys. He is gone. This is a very different regime. It's an entirely different regime. It's a different day for Alabama. There's still a lot of talent. No one's denying that. Alabama is still an extraordinarily talented football team, one of the most talented teams in the entire country. But the day-to-day is different. The day-to-day operations are different. The culture is different. The demands are different. The messaging is different. Everything about the program is different, other than there's a lot of talent there in Alabama, and the fans really care. I mean, that's the same, but inside the building, it's all different. Yeah, Nick Saban's around somewhere, but he's not coaching, man. I mean, he's not out there. He's not in the meeting rooms. He's not doing that stuff. This is Kalen DeBoer's show. So it's a false equivalence to be able to sit here and say, oh, well, Alabama has owned Georgia, so that means they will own Georgia in 2024, because it's a different regime. It's a different program, right? It's just night and day. Now, could Alabama win this game? Of course, sure, absolutely Alabama can win this game. But you have to look deeper. If that's what you think, that's fine. But you have to look deeper than just saying, well, Alabama has Georgia's number. I mean, that's been the case, but not this version of Alabama. This 2024 Alabama team, led by Kalen DeBoer, this new version of Alabama, they haven't had Georgia's number. It's a totally different team. It's a different deal entirely. Now, the one team we do know a lot about in this matchup is Georgia. We know a lot about Georgia. We don't know much about Alabama right now. We don't. We know a lot about Georgia. We know the talent level that Georgia has with this 2024 football team. We know the coaching continuity. We know the demands, the way that Kirby Smart demands his team operate at a certain level, the standard, all those things, right? Which I know is a Saban thing that I don't know if he originated, but he certainly popularized that in college football. But we know the demands within the Georgia program. We know the culture within the Georgia program. And those of you who've been listening for a long time, you know, I often say, I believe that's been the separator for Georgia. Of course, we have a ton of talent, but a lot of teams have talent. What has separated Georgia over the past 3 years? It's culture, in my estimation. So we know that. We know the loads of key players returning at key positions. We also know this was a Georgia team that, with our total yardage margin, was plus 2,900 last year, guys. Again, that means that Georgia outgained its opponents by 2,900 yards combined last year, guys. That is as elite as it gets. Now, did we get the college football playoff? No. Did we win the SEC championship? No. Did we win the national championship? No. We fell short of those goals, and that's on us. But I still think you can make a very strong argument that Georgia, through the totality of the season, was the best team in the country. Just weren't on that Saturday in early December against Alabama. That's just the way it was. So this is a Georgia team that last year was plus 2,900 yards in our yardage margin. We return our starting quarterback, who might very well be the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. That remains to be seen, but he will be a first-round draft pick. I feel very strongly about that. We return 5 starters on the offensive line. Now, if you want to say, well, Marius Mims left, how can you say return 5 starters? Well, Marius Mims was hurt for half the year, and Xavier Truss started the rest of those games at right tackle. He is back this year. So in many ways, you could say we could return 5 starters. You could argue, well, you only return 4. That's fine. We return 5 guys. They're going to start game 1 for us, almost certainly going to start game 1 for us. That started at least half of our games last year, right? That same lineup started half of our games last year. So I think you can certainly argue 5 returning starters, if not 4 returning starters and the ultimate utility man. We are loaded at wide receiver, big-time transfer from Florida at running back, elite talent everywhere on defense. We know that. That's always the case for Georgia. We know all those things about Georgia. What do we know about Alabama? This Alabama team. I'm not talking about Nick Saban Alabama teams. I'm not talking about the 2020 Alabama team or 2017 Alabama team. I'm talking about what do we know about the 2024 Alabama team? Well, okay, yeah, we know that, well, the 2023 version beat Georgia, but that's not really this version. Some of the players certainly overlap and carry over. Sure, they probably shouldn't have beaten Georgia, but they did. You got to give them credit there. They were the better team on that day. That's fair. But this is an Alabama team coming off last year that was plus 1,079 yards in their yardage margin. Now, they beat Georgia, and that happened. Like, we have to accept that. That's reality, okay? But, you know, we do see oftentimes in college football, the better team does not always win. I'm a Georgia guy, so you can call me a homer if you want. That's fine. I still maintain that Georgia's a better team. And the numbers bear that out. Now, on that field of play inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium on that December Saturday, we were not the better team. We played terribly in that game. Alabama played really well. You got to give them credit. They won that football game fair and square. Well, certainly was a call or two by the officials that certainly helped. But hey, Alabama still, regardless, they played better. We did that to ourselves. We lost the game. But we were plus 2,900 yards through the totality of the season. Alabama was like a third as good, essentially, in their total yardage margin. I know that's not how you play games. That's not how games are won or lost. But again, if you look in totality, Georgia through the whole season was a better team. But Alabama does return Jalen Milroe. Georgia returns his quarterback. We know Alabama also can say the same thing. Jalen Milroe is a really interesting prospect, though. I do fully expect Milroe to take a step this year. His season last year was fascinating. I mean, booed off the field, essentially, benched, then brought back, and wasn't really the guy they need to operate what Alabama was trying to do offensively early in the year. Give their offensive staff credit. They finally, late in the year, realized, all right, this guy does this very well. We're going to lean into his strengths, and we're just going to roll with it and see where it takes us. And to their credit, it worked really well, and they made that late season run, right? So they got to the college football playoff, and it worked well. But Jalen Milroe is still a guy who's very, very much in the developmental stage of his career. He's obscenely talented, like physically gifted. He's got the physical gifts. And I do, again, expect him to take a step. You just expect it to be a natural progression for a quarterback going into, like, we'll call it his second year as a starter. He didn't start all of last year, but a good chunk of last year. So you expect there to be a natural progression, but here's the catch to that. How much of a natural progression is there when it's an entirely new offensive system that he's going to have to learn? He's already a guy that was still very much developing last year, certainly incredibly physically gifted from a raw standpoint, but was still very much learning how to play that position last year within that offense. He never really mastered that Alabama offense. So we're expecting him to all of a sudden master a brand new offense that he has to learn on the fly going to this year. I think that's a little bit of a reach. I still expect him to be better because he did get to play, got that experience. I think he'll take a step, but I do think that this new regime coming in could potentially limit how much of a step he is going to take. Now, you can certainly argue that Kalen DeBoer has had a ton of success with quarterbacks wherever he has gone. That is certainly true. And I know Michael Penix would be the most obvious recent example of that. But let's also remember, there was carryover. He was the OC at Indiana when Michael Penix was at Indiana. Penix essentially knew that offense when he got to Washington. And last year, Penix was going to his second year in that offense, even at Washington, but certainly had been running the Kalen DeBoer offense for a while. Very, very familiar with that. Not the case with Jalen Milroe. There's no overlap here. There's no carryover. There's no familiarity with what Washington really does. Now, will they lean into what he does well, the way the Alabama offensive staff did late last year? Certainly. I mean, again, Kalen DeBoer's track record quarterback speaks for itself. I just have questions about the fit. Does Jalen Milroe's skill set fit with what Kalen DeBoer has had a lot of success with the quarterback position. He can throw the ball 100 miles an hour and throw it 100 yards down the field. Sure, absolutely. Very physically gifted. But the accuracy, certainly in that short to intermediate range, has always been kind of there, kind of not. At times, very erratic. His ability to diagnose pre-snap, post-snap, go through progressions, got better at it as the season progressed, but also he wasn't asked to do as much of it as the season progressed. And that's something that they do demand a lot more of in the Kalen DeBoer offense, the traditional Kalen DeBoer offense. So I'm very intrigued to see what they do with Jalen Milroe, and do they change their system to a degree to fit his skill set? I think that's a very fascinating question, not just for Alabama, but going into this entire 2024 college football season for the college football world at large. So Milroe is the guy that, yes, I do think will take a step, but there's far more questions around their quarterback situation with all that context I just laid out than there is Georgia's quarterback situation. And you got to think about this too. You have a team in Alabama who is losing not just the greatest college football coach of all time. They're losing their best offensive lineman in Latham, who went in the first round of the NFL draft. Now, you can argue Caden Proctor might be more talented long-term. Caden Proctor was not that great last year, guys. I know he's coming back, and he's highly talented and physically gifted and all those things. You expect him to also get better in year two, but, I mean, the dude was their worst pass protector last year. I mean, those are the facts, man. Will he get better? Probably. Wasn't here for spring practice. That probably doesn't help his development. We'll see there, but they do lose their best offensive lineman from last year. They lose their top 3 pass rushers from last year, who, oh, by the way, combined for 25 sacks. The rest of the team last year combined for 14. All 3 of those guys, including Dallas Turner, first-round guy, gone off of last year's team. They lose their 2 best cover guys. They lose their top 3 wide receivers, their top 2 running backs. And, oh yeah, again, not to be discounted, the greatest college football coach in the history of the sport, at least to date. And that's Alabama matching up against a Georgia team with a returning starting quarterback, a ton of young talent that played a lot last year, one of the best, if not the best, returning offensive lines in the country, a ton of weapons offensively around Carson Beck, and also something to prove. When Georgia has something to prove, Georgia's usually pretty good. And in this matchup, Georgia's going to have something to prove. There's no doubt about that. And look, we have had our issues against Alabama. Again, like I said at the outset, I'm not going to deny that. Those are the facts, man. Like, the record is what it is. We have to own that. We have had our struggles against Alabama. But again, that was Nick Saban's Alabama. And it's almost like Kirby Smart, it's almost like choke's not the right word. I know Alabama fans would say choked. I think we got to outsmart ourselves, kind of outthought ourselves, and got too much in our heads playing Alabama, because we would approach those games in Alabama in a very different manner than how we approached any other game. I mean, think about last year, guys, in the SEC Championship game. That was an entirely different approach that we took to that game, offensively and defensively, than we did all year long. We were very passive early on in that game defensively. We dialed up the pressure in the second half, and yeah, we had a ton of success doing that, but it was almost too late at that point. We just played a very different type of game, and I feel like that's something that we saw time and time again with Georgia playing Alabama outside of the national championship game in 2021. I would also say 2017. Like, we played as well as we probably could have in 2017. Alabama was just better than Georgia in 2017. I mean, I went into that game expecting Georgia to probably lose that game, thinking there's a chance we could win if we played out of our minds, and Alabama probably played below their capabilities. But Alabama was a better team. They were just a more talented team. They were fully built out. That was year 2 of Kirby Smart. So, I mean, we played really well in that game. I don't think we outsmarted ourselves. Like, we played a hell of a game. We coached a hell of a game. It is what it is. I mean, they were just better than us in 2017. But recently, I don't feel that way. I mean, the games we've lost, Alabama, I believe that we're the more talented team. We should have won. We were the better team overall last year. We weren't the better team on that day. All right? I mean, 2021, or the 2021 SEC Championship game, I'd say the same thing. Alabama was really good, and they beat us in that game, and tip your cap to them. They did what they had to do. We played really poorly in that game. We did. We simply did. And we came back and played a much better football game in the national championship game, and we won that game. So, we've had our issues, and I do think there are times where we've outsmarted ourselves, kind of got into our own heads, and just approached it differently than we really should have. And I think maybe Nick Saban being there on the other sideline had a lot to do with that, but that's not going to be the case. The boogeyman, if you want to call him that, is not on the other sideline. It's not going to happen this year. So at the end of the day, these are 2 really, really talented teams, 2 extraordinarily talented teams. You can maybe even make the argument that 2 overall 1 through 85 scholarship players, the 2 most overall talented teams in the country. But again, one of those teams, Georgia, returned 76% of its offensive production off of an offense that was top 5 nationally pretty much across the board last year, including, again, the potential number 1 overall draft pick at quarterback, certainly a first-round draft pick at quarterback, 4 to 5 stars on the offensive line, depending on how you want to define starter. We're losing 4 stars on defense, but one of those starters in Jamon Dumas-Johnson transferred out to Kentucky because he saw the writing on the wall. He knew he was not going to play as much this year. A lot of those young freshmen were eating into his playing time last year, and it was going to happen even more so this year. So he saw the writing on the wall, went out the door, went to Kentucky. All right? So we have a ton of talent. I think we have the most talented inside linebacker room in the entire country. And beyond just inside linebacker, we played a ton of freshmen on defense last year. Those guys are ready to take another step this year. And overall, we are top 50 nationally in Bill Connelly's returning production metrics. And that's against an Alabama team on the other side that's 115th nationally in Bill Connelly's returning production overall. That certainly has a physically gifted quarterback, but he's still very much learning how to play that position, and he's going to be playing that in a new offense, trying to learn a new system on the fly. They only have 33% of their defensive production returning this year, and defense has been a big part of Alabama's success in recent years. And as I've said, they not only lose the greatest head coach in the history of the sport, but also a head coach that was a very key part to their defensive success. I mean, if you look at it there, guys, I know that Georgia has struggled, admittedly, with Alabama the last 8 years. Those are the facts. And I know this game is in Tuscaloosa. But everything else outside of those 2 factors favors Georgia in this matchup. It really does. Not by an overwhelming margin. No, certainly not. But by 4.5 points? Yeah. Absolutely. I would say even up to potentially as high as maybe a touchdown. And Bama fans, I know you're freaking out. I know you're sitting there furiously typing in the comments and ripping me apart. I know. I understand that. I'm sure you got some great dingers in there for me. Whatever. But ask yourself this. Just ask yourself this. If we did a blind resume here, and we looked at the Georgia resume, and we looked at Alabama resume when analyzing this matchup, and we looked at the teams, the rosters, the returning production, the coaching continuity, all of that context, and you didn't know, it was a blind resume, you didn't know which team you were looking at. You just said Team A and Team B. Would you pick Alabama? Would it be Alabama? Would you pick Alabama's resume? Would you pick the context that they have in this game, that roster, the inexperience they have at key positions? Would you honestly pick Alabama to win this game if you didn't know which team was which? I would argue probably not. I can't say certainly not, because again, I don't think the margin is that wide, but there's a really strong chance you probably wouldn't pick Alabama if you're really being honest with yourselves. But hey, because we're Bama and we own Georgia, we're going to win. At least that's the argument from a lot of Alabama fans right now. And for me, guys, I mean, I'm just going to be real with you. That argument just doesn't really hold water. It doesn't hold water. It's lazy, man. It's lazy because, again, this is not the same Alabama program. This is not Nick Saban's Alabama. Still a very talented, extraordinarily talented football team. No doubt about it. Still absolutely very capable of winning this game. I'm not guaranteeing Georgia will win this game. That's not what this episode is about. This is about the spread, and is the spread fair or not? But if you consider the context of this game and the context of these 2 teams, these 2 rosters and their respective situations in 2024, not 2017, not 2018, not 2023, in 2024, I think it's very reasonable and very defensible to have Georgia as a 4.5 point favorite heading into this game, at least sitting here on May 15th. But all right, guys, I know, let me have it. I know you Alabama fans, if you're watching this, you're going to rip me apart. That's cool, whatever. But yeah, I appreciate you guys checking out, whether you agree with me or not. Like, subscribe, let me know what you think. I appreciate you guys. And again, this is just a small taste of what we do on the Glory UJ podcast, a little snippet of one of our episodes. So if you want more of this content, make sure to check out the Glory UJ podcast wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Pods, Spotify, Google, wherever it is. It'll be up there for you guys. We have a ton of content, and we never go dark. I'm producing content week in, week out, every single week of the year, off season, in season, it doesn't matter. And this is stuff designed for diehard Georgia fans by a diehard Georgia fan. So thanks, guys. Appreciate you. I'm Tyler, and as always, go Dogs.
Man, is there going to be some property destroyed tonight. 26-21. Dogs on top.